Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody. Yesterday I had my old friend Simon Cooper from the Financial Times on the show. There's a new piece in the FT arguing that the American dream is dead and there may be a European dream. The only thing left in America are the tech bros, the tech billionaires. And as it happens, Cooper was also on the show in December of last year, talking about what he described as the chilling parallels between MAGA America and apartheid South Africa. He had a provocative FT piece about Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and the shadow of apartheid in South Africa, how some of Silicon Valley's leading entrepreneurs, or certainly most valuable, wealthiest entrepreneurs, have background in apartheid South Africa. And the often bizarre and rather chilling nature of Silicon Valley ideology is also brought out today. And our guest, Adam Becker, has a new book out. It's called More Everything Forever, AI Overlords, Space Empires, and Silicon Valley's Crusade to Control the Fate of Humanity. Adam is joining us, appropriate enough, from Berkeley, California, where the fate of humanity is always a big issue. Adam, congratulations on the new book. I'm not sure if you're familiar with some of these arguments about the uncanny association between apartheid South Africa and contemporary Silicon Valley. Do you get into that in the book at all?
I don't talk about South Africa specifically, but I am aware of those arguments, and I think they're pretty accurate. I do talk about the racism and eugenics that are underpinning a lot of these ideas that these Silicon Valley billionaires
Yeah, and that's actually what I was thinking. We did a short history of eugenics also earlier this year.
Yeah.
Are some of these figures, what you call our AI overlords, are they flirting with eugenics?
Flirting is an understatement. They're a lot of them are just fully into it. When you hear Elon Musk talking about declining birth rates and the need to have lots and lots and lots of kids, and Mark Andreessen saying similar things, these ideas come from eugenics. Mark Andreessen has said that he thinks that the birth rate might already be dropping, which is not true, but it's a dog whistle for talking about fear of white people being replaced, which is just an old idea from eugenics that doesn't really make any sense.
How does this connect then with the themes in your book about AI overlords, more everything forever? When one thinks of AI in an odd way, it's replacing all of us, white, black, male, female, rich and poor. Is there a connection between the chilling ideology that Cooper and many others have talked about and artificial intelligence? You're a tech guy, a real tech guy. Your last book was on astrophysics, so you know this stuff inside out. Is there a connection, Adam, odd way, between artificial intelligence and eugenics and some of these other very troubling ideologies or scientific movements?
Yeah, definitely. The idea of intelligence as a sort of monolithic trait that can be measured by something like an IQ test underlies a lot of the ways and arguments and ideologies that these people have about AI. And that idea itself stems from eugenics. It doesn't make a lot of sense to talk about intelligence that way. There's no good evidence that intelligence works that way, and a fair amount of evidence that it's not like that. But the idea of being able to like assign a number to someone that will tell you how smart they are intrinsically is something that comes from eugenics historically and has been used by eugenicists historically. And so there's that connection. And there's also the fact that, yeah, they want to use AI to replace all of us. What they really want is a kind of slave. They want AI to be able to do all of the things that they would love to be able to get their workers to do for free with perfect control. And so the goal for a lot of these guys is to have AI running everything, and they run the AI. So they run everything.
But is this different substantively from previous waves of technological innovation? Facebook and Google, the Web 2.0 giants, gave their tech away for free in exchange for our data. Is there a fundamental difference between Web 2 or Web 1 and this current AI revolution and the nature of this technology? You say that they want to turn all of us into slaves. Some people would suggest, we've had many shows on surveillance capitalism, that this is also a form of slavery.
Yeah, I mean, the goal remains the same for these tech oligarchs, right? They want control. They want to be able to, dictate how things are in the world. I think that earlier forms, so a couple of things. First of all, I think that these earlier waves of tech coming out of Silicon Valley were ways of trying to, assert control over the rest of us. Whereas with AI, I think they're trying to just sort of replace the rest of us, and so that they don't need us and can just ignore anything that the rest of us need. But the other thing is, it's not going to work. They believe that the AI that they've got, if they just throw more power and more information and more energy at it, that it'll be, that its intelligence will become unlimited, that it'll become super intelligent and capable of doing essentially anything. And there's very little reason to believe that that's true, and a great deal of good arguments that that's not going to happen anytime soon, or perhaps ever. And so they're pursuing this sort of impossible dream of perfect control through, a kind of AI that doesn't exist and will probably not exist in the lifetimes of anybody currently alive. And the problem is not only that they want this perfect control over the rest of us, but that in the pursuit of that control, they will destroy and exploit large amounts of the stuff in the world that the rest of us need, and the natural beauty of the world.
Adam, some people might be watching this and saying you're turning these characters, the Musks and the Teals and the Altmans, into cartoon characters. Musk, of course, was involved with OpenAI, was the co-founder with Sam Altman at the beginning. He feared AI. Altman has articulated an ambivalence. He changes his positions from time to time, but nonetheless, he acknowledges there are problems. People like Dario Amodei, who was at OpenAI and now is the founder, CEO of Anthropic, an AI platform that I use, wrote a very influential piece called Machines of Loving Grace, which is hopeful about AI making the world a better place. Are you creating one-dimensional characters here, these evil cartoon villains? These men are much more complex. They may not be ideal. They're certainly not Jesus Christ. But they recognize some of the problems, and they have a degree of moral responsibility, don't they?
No, the problems that they've asserted could happen with AI are all completely made up. They don't care about the real problems. It is true that the statements I just made a few minutes ago made them sound kind of one-dimensional, and they aren't one-dimensional, but when you fill in more of the shading and detail, you don't find a great deal more accuracy or subtlety around their ideas around AI. The dangers that Altman and Musk and Amadei have talked about are made up. They are fully made up. The idea of existential risk from a runaway super intelligent AI is a fantasy. It is just something out of science fiction, and the arguments in favor of that being a plausible outcome are all nonsense. And I go into them in great detail in my book. I talked with experts. The arguments just fall apart. And it's that kind of danger that Amadei and Altman and Musk and the others in leading that industry have talked about. What they haven't talked about are the real dangers that exist with currently existing AI systems, like algorithmic bias, surveillance, and just using them to replace people when they can't actually do the things that people do.
Are you suggesting, Adam, that they're making this stuff up knowingly, that they're actively lying?
No, they're not lying. I think they genuinely believe it. They're just wrong.
But there is quite an influential group of people who are fearful. Came out of some work from Oxford experts on AI associated with the paperclip. Are you suggesting that that's just completely wrong? I mean, is that just your opinion, or is it a scientific consensus?
It's, there's a reasonably good set of arguments that all of those people are wrong. The people you're talking about are actually major figures in my book. You'll be shocked to see what they say about these things and how bad their arguments are when you dig into them. The arguments about the paperclip maximizer out of Oxford, it falls apart if you just touch it wrong. It's a house of cards. And these experts at Oxford are not actually experts in AI. They're not. They're mostly ethicists who have fallen in love with a series of science fictional thought experiments. The communities that these ideas came from, like effective altruism and the rationalist community here in the Bay Area, these ideas were cooked up online on message boards, and like good ideas have come out of message boards. These just aren't some of those good ideas. These are not good ideas. Ultimately, it all traces back to ideas about the singularity and transhumanism, stuff from the 90s and earlier here in the Bay. And those ideas also fall apart if you breathe on them wrong. That's actually the main thesis of the book.
Adam, though, some serious scientists, so again, you're the scientist, but I'm assuming they're serious, people like John Hopfield, Jeffrey Hinton, who I know, he won the Nobel Prize for Physics last year.
Sure.
He's also articulated deep concern. He may not quite believe in AGI and the idea of machines taking over the world, but there is a legitimate argument, isn't there, about concern about machines becoming too smart, too powerful?
Not really. No, I just fully reject that.
So you're saying that Hinton's wrong too?
Yeah. No, Hinton's argument is basically the same as the people in Oxford and Musk and the rest of them. Their argument is essentially that intelligence is a monolithic thing, and that you could have a machine that is intelligent enough that it could learn to make itself smarter, and then that would lead to some sort of feedback loop, and it would become super intelligent and then take over the world. There's no good argument for this. Hinton is an expert in a certain kind of machine learning. He is not an expert in the notion of intelligence. He's not an expert in AGI, this idea that he's talking about as a possible danger, because there are no such thing as AGI experts. It doesn't exist, and it's poorly defined.
But if there are no such thing as experts, then who should we trust on this? I mean, should we trust you? You're no more of an expert. You certainly haven't won the Nobel Prize for Physics.
I know more physics than Jeffrey Hinton.
You do?
Sure. Yeah. Jeffrey Hinton's not a physicist.
And what's we've done so many shows on this, I can't remember even all the names of the scientists, but there is a community within the physics community that is concerned with this. Isn't that fair?
There are some physicists who are concerned about this, like I think Max Tegmark is concerned about this and stuff like that. Again, these arguments come out of these particular communities, and if you take a look at the arguments, they don't work. It's like saying, there's a great analogy actually from God, I'm blanking on his name, but there's a very good analogy about this. Talking about this is like saying that if you know how to do brain surgery, then you can make yourself, infinitely good at brain surgery by doing brain surgery on the brain surgery part of your brain. That's the way that these guys talk about AI. There's no good reason to believe that any of this is true, and a great deal of evidence that it's not true. Most of it is just based on the assumption that an exponential trend can continue forever, when in fact, what we know is that if there's an exponential trend, the one thing that has to be true about it is that it will end.
Other people said that about Moore's law. That hasn't ended yet. We did a show.
Moore's law has ended. Moore's law is over.
Well, but we did a show on NVIDIA, which suggests that there's a kind of post Moore's law. But anyway, I'm not going to take you on that front because it's certainly not my expertise. Parmy Olson's book about supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the race that will change the world, that won the FT Book of the Year last year. She's been on the show a couple of times. She speaks quite highly of Demis Hassabis. She thinks that actually he'll be the next CEO of Google. And that when compared with Altman, that he is the grown-up in the room. What's Hassabis's position? And are there, and in your view, you've suggested that Amadei, Hinton, obviously Musk, and some of the others aren't credible or mature. Are there any responsible figures within this community in your mind?
I think Melanie Mitchell is pretty good. I think Jan LeCun is pretty good. I think, what's his name? Oh my God, Rodney Brooks at MIT knows what he's talking about. What
about the guy at Berkeley? You're just up the street from you.
Stuart Russell.
Yeah.
He knows a lot about deep learning, but he's fallen for the same narrative about the existential threat of superintelligent AI as the rest of them, and his arguments are no better than theirs. As I said, your question before about who should we listen to on this is a good one. And the answer is you take a look at the quality of the argumentation. Their arguments fall apart. This is one of the main things that I talk about in my new book. I went and talked with the experts. I looked at what everybody had written, and it just does not work. The science and the logic and the mathematics is just not on their side.
Does it really matter, though, in terms of whether or not their vision, this dramatic, perhaps existential vision of AI, will be realized or not, whether we get to AGI and everyone has a different definition of what AGI actually is? Clearly, AI is going to change the world, isn't it? Billions of dollars are now being invested as we speak in these companies. Tens of millions of people subscribe now to OpenAI. Is one of the arguments in the book that AI is changing the world, or is it all an illusion?
I don't think it's all an illusion. Large language models are certainly capable of doing some impressive things, and they have some uses. I'm not convinced that those use cases are worth the environmental hit that the massive AI data centers require. But I would be the first one to say that large language models can do some impressive things. How they're going to change the economy remains to be seen. The Silicon Valley has a long history of hype and investing a large amount of money in things that turn out to be not very significant or important, like cryptocurrency is not, doesn't really have very many legal use cases. But yeah, I mean, the whole venture capital ecosystem needs hype like oxygen to survive. And so I'm just quite wary of believing that simply because venture capitalists and big tech companies have invested large amounts of money, that means it must, anything that they do that with must pan out. But these large language models and other generative AI systems, they are genuinely interesting and impressive, and it will be interesting to see where they go. But I would not want to jump to the conclusion that they're definitely going to change, the world's economy or people's everyday experiences.
We did a show also recently with the Wall Street Journal reporter Keach Hagee. She has a new book out. Again, another AI book, so many AI books.
Yep.
The Optimist, Sam Altman, OpenAI, and the Race to Invent the Future. I'm sure you've read it. You probably talked to Hagee. Her argument is that Altman's superpower is his ability to sell, which I'm guessing then in that sense, she's probably on the same page as you. But isn't that what entrepreneurs like Altman, Musk, Thiel, certainly Steve Jobs, they're all about? They're all in the business of selling.
Sure.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's what their business is.
Yeah. No, there's nothing wrong with that. No. I actually, I know about that book, but I haven't read it. I think it came out pretty recently. And I haven't talked to the author, though I'd like to. But no, there's certainly nothing wrong with selling things. And you're right. It's a key part of the business. The problem shows up when we start believing that the people who are very good at selling things are also general experts in all kinds of other things. Sam Altman is very good at selling all kinds of things, including Sam Altman. But
particularly Sam Altman, I think.
Particularly Sam
some
Altman.
People have so much trouble with him.
Yeah. So, but that does not mean that he's a general expert on things outside of that domain. He is not an expert on AI. He's not an expert on I don't think he's even an expert on tech. He's an expert on how to sell.
What do you make of the civil war within OpenAI between the people who wanted to focus on turning AI into a for-profit company and those who saw it more, in their mind at least, with more moral responsibility as protecting the world from AI? I'm guessing that you're not particularly keen on either side.
That's correct. Yeah. No, I think both sides are living in a fantasy world. I think one side is living in this fantasy of this apocalyptic danger from AI, and another side is living in this fantasy of technological utopia from AI. And I think they are both living in pretty much the same fantasy world, just with a couple of small different tweaks. Playing the same tabletop fantasy role-playing game, just with different alignments, but here in the real world, I mostly think that both sides in that debate have wildly overblown the promise of AI. I tend to agree with, Tressie McMillan Cottom wrote an article in the New York Times just a few weeks ago calling AI mid or mediocre. And I tend to agree.
If we were having this argument 20 years ago, Adam, we might be having a similar argument about the power of social media. Mark Zuckerberg back then was the Sam Altman or the Elon Musk of the world, claiming that social media was about to transform the world. And some thinkers were very skeptical, saying he didn't really understand technology, didn't understand its power. And in a sense, they were right. And yet, 20 years later, for better or worse, social media has changed the world, mostly in a way that Zuckerberg couldn't have imagined, or any of us actually couldn't have imagined. Mostly, it would seem, for the worse. Are you saying that the AI revolution is just, as to borrow the word from the author you just quoted, mid, just not much there? Or are you suggesting that it is actually pretty powerful and it's going to change the world in ways that we can't even imagine? So if we were to have this conversation again in 2045, would we be talking about the next big thing? Or would we be talking about the way in which AI has and will change the world?
That's a good question. I think the analogy to social media is an interesting one. It's certainly true that that Mark Zuckerberg didn't see where social media was going, and his critics, some of them also didn't see, but I think some of them, noticed that there were some dangers, and correctly so. I think that, like social media, this current round of AI interest and AI companies and AI products is going to be used to further concentrate wealth and power. And that can be done through the power of hype, whether or not AI really is mid. The hype itself carries power, and these visions of the future that come along with AI, these, dystopias and utopias, they make the product sound more powerful and narrow the terms on which we can talk about the future. And that itself carries a great deal of power. And that is power that these tech billionaires are going to try to arrogate to themselves.
But isn't that a reflection, for better or worse, and I probably would agree with you that it's mostly for the worse, the winner-take-all nature of the tech economy? And this was as true for Microsoft as it is for Google and Facebook and OpenAI today. And that I'm not sure you would include Bill Gates as one of our AI overlords. In fact, he spent the last 20 or 30 years trying to give back some of his wealth to humanity. So it's just the nature of technology. It doesn't reflect morally one way or the other on the people involved in the field.
I'm not sure that I agree. I think, the nature of technology is not fixed. It is, any more than what technology is developed is, predetermined. I actually think that one of the problems with the narratives about the future that these tech oligarchs often believe in and try to sell to the rest of us is that they seem to believe that the future of technology actually is fixed or can only go down one or two different paths, that there's sort of like a technology tree, like in a video game like Civilization, and we can sort of slow down or speed up or decide which branch we're going to take, but that ultimately it's all predetermined, as opposed to the actual history of anything in the human endeavor, which is filled with contingency and human choice. So, if I'm not willing to say, oh, it's the nature of the tech industry that this kind of thing happens. Like, well, this tech industry does that, but we could build a different one.
Are there individuals who are particularly troubling? I mean, Musk, of course, is
Sure.
probably the least popular figure in the world these days. He seems to have applied a lot of the principles you discussed in More Everything Forever to the destruction of government in the United States. Thiel has also been remarkably unpopular. Are those the two principal villains in your book, More Everything Forever?
I don't know. I don't know how I feel about the idea of the word villain in the book. There are people in the book who do things that I like or don't like, but no, I would actually say that a lot of the major figures in the book who I don't agree with are not actually billionaires. The billionaires have taken their ideas from other people. People like Ray Kurzweil, Eliezer Yudkowsky, Nick Bostrom.
Bostrom's the Oxford philosopher, of course, who wrote the influential book on the paperclips, taking over the world.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
and many years ago, Kurzweil was on the show, and I have to admit, he was a very peculiar fellow.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, but among the tech billionaires, I would say Mark Andreessen is a really thoughtless guy who has done a lot of damage.
Why? What is it? Because he should know better, that he's actually a grown-up?
I mean, I think once you're a billionaire, it might be difficult to behave like a grown up. I don't know. I'm not a billionaire, but you know, when you can have anything that you want at the snap of your fingers, it makes it, I think, hard to remain a mature, responsible adult. But no, Andreessen, I think, thinks of himself as a kind of thought leader. He put out this manifesto of techno optimism like a year and a half ago, and it's poorly reasoned and authoritarian, fascist, even. In fact, he quotes the co-author of the Fascist Manifesto very lovingly in his manifesto. And I think that Andreessen, I don't know, my impression is that he may have fooled himself into thinking that he's got really good ideas about everything. And the fact is that, you know, like most of us, like me and you, his expertise is fairly narrow.
I don't have any expertise, Adam.
Yeah.
I'm under no illusion of that. I think there is a Trumpian quality to Andreessen in that he takes himself very seriously and he's incredibly thin-skinned.
Yes.
But I mean, he's achieved a lot more than Trump. What do you make then of Reid Hoffman? He's been on the show a couple of times. I've known the guy for many years. Seems very decent. He recently came out with a book about how AI was going to make the world a better place. We need to give it a second chance. In fact, we had his co-author on the show. Is he deluded? Is he dishonest? Is there a credible argument for that Hoffman makes?
You know, I don't know Reid Hoffman personally. I don't want to speak to, like, you know.
But have you read the book? Yeah. Have you looked at what he's arguing?
I have looked at the arguments. I haven't read the book, but I've looked at the arguments, and I read, I have to say, one of the most brutal reviews of a book that I've ever seen from Kirkus. They really, really didn't like his book. And I have to say, the excerpts that I've seen of the book, they don't look very good.
To be perhaps a little too kind, it could have been written by AI.
Oh, well, actually, apparently it was. They said that large chunks of it were written by AI. And you know, to quote Emily Bender up at the University of Washington, if nobody bothered writing it, why should I bother reading it?
Yeah, well, he sent it out to all his friends. I'm not sure why billionaires write books.
Yeah.
So we've got this technology, Adam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As you've acknowledged, it has some value. I mean, sure. LLMs are useful. I have to admit that I rely on them to make some summaries for some of our conversations on Anthropic. What should we be doing if Adam Becker ruled the world or ruled Silicon Valley? What would this technology be used for? I mean, these companies have billions of dollars of VC investment, so they have to be for profit.
Yeah. That's true.
So what would you be doing with them, and how are we gonna, rather than controlling the fate of humanity, the AI overlords controlling our fate of humanity? How can we control the technology so that we protect the fate of humanity?
I mean, I think it would be nice to go after some of the biggest problems facing humanity a little more directly, like global warming. You know, it's interesting, I think. That, you know, you mentioned Bill Gates earlier, and yeah, he's done a lot of philanthropic efforts, and there are questions about like the efficacy of some of those interventions. But you know, he wants to make those changes in the world, and you know, and then there are inherent problems with billionaire philanthropy and so on and so forth. But it is interesting that he's chosen as, you know, his signature issue malaria, and not. Which is not to say that malaria is not a big deal. Malaria is a very big deal, but it's interesting that he's chosen malaria and not, say, climate change. And more generally, these Silicon Valley companies, they're pursuing this dream of AI in pursuit of this promise of a utopia that may never come, and the arguments for it are not very good. Rather than saying, oh, we have all of these resources, why don't we use them to try to build better green technology?
Well, there is a huge sector of the tech industry which is focusing on green technology. There are VC
Sure.
firms investing. So it's not as if...
Absolutely.
What about the role of government? I mean, are you an admirer perhaps more of what the Chinese are doing, where the government is more in control over AI technology? There seems to be a new Sputnik race now between the US and China over AI. Are you sympathetic to the Chinese model over the American one?
Meh. I think in general, I'm not a big fan of authoritarian regimes, be they, of the American right or, communist, directly running something like that. I am pretty far left. I think that there's definitely a place for the government to run various sectors of the economy. But I don't know that we need the government running AI research, and I don't know. And to be perfectly frank, I don't know that much about China. I know a lot more about Silicon Valley.
Not everyone would agree with you, as Adam, as you know. Peter Layden was on the show a couple of days ago. He's a Berkeley neighbor of yours. I don't know if you know him. He's the author of The Great Progression Substack page. He was one of the founding editors at Wired magazine. He's much more positive about the future. He thinks AI will have huge value for America. He quoted a book by Carlota Perez. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this book, Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital. Perez, who's been very, very influential, argues that always too much money is poured into these technologies and most of it's wasted. But eventually these technologies are for real. That was true of the internet. It's true of Web 2. Probably be true of AI. What do you make? I'm not sure if you're familiar with Perez's work, but
I'm not.
What do you make of that argument that in the end, even if much of this money is wasted, a lot of froth, nonsense, lies, false promises, that in the end, this AI revolution will be for real, even if we don't realize, quote unquote, whatever AGI actually is?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think large language models are a solution in search of a problem. They were developed because they could be, not with a particular solution in mind, and there's nothing wrong with that inherently. But I think we still don't quite know what problems they're going to end up being really suitable for. There's the most common thing that I hear is, and I understand the argument for it, is that it's going to make it easier for coders to get their coding done more efficiently. And I can understand why people say that, and there's some reasonable arguments in that direction. But there are also some problems that have shown up, like there are very, very serious security flaws that have shown up in AI generated code that, just making the LLM bigger is not necessarily going to solve. In fact, it is also looking like LLMs in particular, as a particular kind of generative AI, may be played out. Throwing more resources at them doesn't seem to be, at this point, doesn't seem to be making them better at what they do. So
friend of the show is Gary Marcus. I'm sure you're familiar with his skepticism. He, like you, argues that we took the wrong fork in the road when it comes to generative AI. Do you think that Marcus is someone we should take seriously?
Yeah, I mean, he seems to have a good head on his shoulders about this stuff. I mean, I just think that this kind of AI has a lot more hype around it than is warranted. It is not 100% hype. There is something there. But the hype is, I mean this very literally, out of this world. They are saying, some of these people are saying things like, oh, AI is going to solve global warming for us within a few years. So we just need to burn more fossil fuels for now to get to AGI. And then the AGI will wave a magic wand.
Who's saying that?
That's who's saying that? That's I can give you two names: Sam Altman and Eric Schmidt. Both said that in the last 2 years.
Yeah, and they're both questionable characters, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely, and yet they are both taken very seriously. So yeah, I don't know. I guess it really depends on what you mean by working out. Yeah.
Well, finally, it's a very interesting argument you've taken, Adam, and I think it will be. The book has already been well reviewed, and I think you'll find a very sympathetic readership. You're a scientist, a serious scientist. Your last book did very well. It was much more of a hard science book.
Yes.
And you call yourself an author and an astrophysicist. Do we have another model for responsible moral scientists? Of course, a couple of years ago, the Oppenheimer movie did very well, the 2023 movie, which presented a very serious scientist in a moral light, in a somewhat sympathetic way. Is Oppenheimer and some of the other moral conversation, shall we say, about atomic weapons relevant? Although, of course, Oppenheimer was also a rather pessimistic film in the sense that Oppenheimer lost out, and it was Edward Teller and others who were victorious. Do we need to look back at a more morally sophisticated or accountable, responsible community of scientists?
I think that there's something there. I think that there is a general problem with thinking that, and I realize this is a somewhat odd thing to say as a scientist, thinking that scientists have all of the answers, that we can count on scientists to be responsible, not just in terms of how scientific research is conducted and how technology is used, but I also think that there is a sense that, like, because science and scientific discovery drives technological change, and technological change drives a lot of societal change, that therefore scientists can tell us about, tell us truths about society, and that science is more important for understanding what's going on in the world than anything else. And I just don't think that that's true. I think that the humanities have been, for a very long time now, undervalued. And the idea that, maybe it's a very good idea to have a good education that's well-rounded, that maybe a better understanding of, history, for example, rather than contempt for history, like you find in some corners of Silicon Valley, might lead to a better world.
Finally, Adam, your last book was called What is Real? It was a book about the unfinished quest for the meaning of quantum physics. I'm still, and I apologize if I've asked this question before, I'm still getting two messages from you, in a sense. On the one hand, this AI isn't real. So it's just a lot of sales hype from people like Sam Altman and Eric Schmidt. On the other hand, it's really real, and it's about to destroy the world. Maybe not in the way that Nick Bostrom believed, where we'd all be ruled by paper clips, but in a more social and political way. Is that fair? And if it is, and I know this is a tricky one, because on the one hand, you're a skeptic, but on the other hand, you recognize that the world is dramatically changing. What should we be more concerned about AI, that it is or isn't for real?
I think we should be concerned about the way that existing AI systems are being used and the resources that they're taking up. I think that there are real legitimate concerns there. I think the promises about what AI will be able to do, just next year or in a couple of years or in 5 to 10 years, I think those we should discount quite heavily. Whereas the actual stuff that we already have, we should be focusing, the conversation on AI around those systems, how they're used, how they could be misused, and the way that their enormous ecological footprint is already making the world worse.
Well, an important new book by Adam Becker, one of our leading science writers, More Everything Forever, AI Overlords, Space Empires, and Silicon Valley's Crusade to Control the Fate of Humanity. Thank you so much, Adam, and very interesting conversation. We'll have to get you back on the show. Certainly this story is only in its infancy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. This was a lot of fun.